Hello?
Yes, yes.
Shall we
We
start?
can start. Yes, yes,
All
we
right.
can.
Right.
Okay.
Knowledge is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, it cannot be harvested. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Department of English here at Yadava College, we welcome you all to the National Webinar Lecture Series 2, titled Necessitating Introspection on Introduction to the Anthropocentrism, to be presented by Dr. Gautam Kamakar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Barbasar Bikram Tudu Memorial College, West Bengal, India. Now, this is the time to welcome our gathering. May I request Dr. Raju sir, head of the department and convener of the program, to welcome this August gathering. Sir, the session is over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ratnam.
Thank you, sir.
Very good morning to you all participants. I'm really very happy that you're all here. This is the second lecture of a series of lectures we have arranged nationally. We have called it as National Webinar Lecture Series. In the last lecture, Dr. G. Bhaskaran of the Department of English, he is a professor in the Department of English, Gandhigram Rural Institute, Dindikal, was the resource person. And his lecture was an immense success. And even after the session was over, there was a flood of queries about the research methodology, and many questions were directed to his email, which he very happily replied. On this occasion, I thank him. I thank Dr. Bhaskar. Today, we have in our midst Dr. Gautam Karmakar. I, on behalf of the principal of Yadava College, Professor M. Shekhar, and the faculty members of the Department of English, Yadava College, and the participants, I'm very happy to introduce to you and welcome at the same time Dr. Gautam Karmakar, a young and energetic academician who has excelled in almost all the genres of English literature. When I just came to see his curriculum vitae, I was wonderstruck. He is so young, but the CV he has given me has immense potential. As I cannot give you all the details in this webinar, I just read out to you some of his credentials. Dr. Gautam Karmakar is an assistant professor of English at Barbasar Bikram Tudu Memorial College, Sida Kano Bishra University, West Bengal, India. He has completed his PhD from the Department of English, Humanities and Social Sciences, National Institute of Technology, Durgapur, West Bengal, India. His essays, research papers, book reviews, and poems have been published in many reputed international journals. He has taken interviews of many notable Indian poets writing in English. He has taken interviews of many notable Indian poets writing in English. Apart from organizing one international conference in India, he has presented papers in many international conferences in India, England, Germany, Slovenia, and other European countries. He has edited 4 critical books on Indian poetry in English. He seeks interest in Indian writings in English, South Asian literature, film studies, Marxism and post-Marxism, eco-critical studies, Dalit literature, and cultural studies. We have such a very distinguished erudite scholar among us to enlighten us on the title of today's webinar, Necessitating Introspection, an Introduction to Anthropocentrism. Dr. Gautam Karmakar has given so many lectures through webinars, and I happen to listen to 2 of his lectures. To be frank, I was wonderstruck by the immense knowledge he possesses, because irrespective of the genres in English literature, he is able to talk on criticism, poetry, novel, anything you name it, he has it. We have such a very illustrious personality. Again, I want to stress the fact that such a young mind has so much of knowledge, and we are very much happy to welcome Dr. Gautam Karmakar. Welcome, sir. And for the participants who are outside Tamil Nadu, I just want to tell you about Yadava College. Yadava College is an autonomous institution in the temple city Madurai of Tamil Nadu. We celebrated our 50 years of inception last year, and it is one of the reputed A-grade colleges in Tamil Nadu. And the Department of English, as the head of the department, I am very proud to say that we are doing a lot of work regarding research. And with a few words, I hand over the virtual platform to Dr. Gautam Karmakar to enlighten us with his erudite scholarship. Thank you, one and all. And participants, you are the fulcrum, as I say, you are the fulcrum of this webinar, and I welcome you wholeheartedly. Dr. Gautam Karmakar, it is yours now. Thank you.
Thank you for your welcome, sir. When you talk, you are only repeating what you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new. Now I invite our Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Gautam Karmakar, sir, address to the gathering. Sir, the session is over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, and I want to thank Department Sriraj, is the assistant professor and head of the Department of English, Yadava College Autonomous, and the organizers. I mean, the organizing secretary and the other committee members and the whole team working behind this virtual platform for putting together this national webinar lecture series conducted by the Department of English, Yadava College Autonomous, and it is in Madurai, Tamil Nadu. And I'm extremely overwhelmed to see this kind of responses or the kind words from you, Sirajji. And thanks to you also for your warm invitation and at the same time introducing me with your students, faculty members, and the other academicians and listeners on this virtual online platform. And the guidance that you were all providing to your students during this severely distressing time is extremely praiseworthy. Now, regarding my talk, which I have given the title as Necessitating Introspection and Introduction to Anthropocentrism. Before going to that, let me share my screen so that you can see the slides. And I'm telling you that it's a kind of visual verbal presentation. So in the slides only will come to know about some kind of pictures, and I will describe those. And that, I have not mentioned anything in the slides. Let me share. Okay, is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. So, the very outset that I'm trying to say, what is anthropocentrism? It means a political, a philosophical viewpoint arguing that human beings are the central or most significant entities in the world. This is a basic belief embedded in many Western religions and philosophies. And my talk will be also on this paradigm. That what is the Western basic of this kind of foundation? And although the talk demands a lot of theoretical and philosophical intervention, I will try to tell you the basic premises or the fundamental characteristics and origins of anthropocentrism. And it means that I will try to introduce my target audience of today's talk, who are basically, I'm guessing, the UG and PG students, to anthropocentrism. A term comes from the Greek words anthropos and kentron. So anthropos means human being and kentron means center. So etymologically, anthropocentrism means human center, and it thus refers to the belief of worldview that humans are. Can I request all the participants to mute your microphone? If it is possible, please do that. Thank you. So basically, it's a kind of human-centered epoch And anthropos means human being, and the centros means center. So anthropocentrism is often identified as the theoretical root cause of present day eco crisis. It's a kind of human overpopulation and the extension of contemporary environmental philosophy, and it is used to draw some kind of attention to a systematic bias in traditional Western attitude to the non-human world. So while we are talking about anthropocentrism, we have to keep in mind certain aspects that while anthropocentrism demands a study only depends on human beings, at the same time, non-anthropocentric study tells about the non-living non-human being entities. It means the plants and the animals. But before going to the Western philosophical theoretical foundation of anthropocentrism, let me tell you the various definitions, or at the same time, the different kind of mm, notions that are related to anthropocentrism. And we may start our discussion by taking into account those different kind of anthropocentrism, like ontological anthropocentrism. You can see that while I am talking about anthropocentrism, there is a chart that is telling that human beings at the center at anthropocentrism. It's the state of being human, and human beings have the ability to suffer. They are some kind of higher animals, and all the animals and inanimate things and the super organism holds. They are not in the canon or not in the main center. They are surrounding at the periphery or the orbit, and you can see it if it as an organic whole. Then this is the all living beings. While we are talking about pathocentrism or biocentrism, but all these are centering around anthropocentrism or human epoch, or a notion which solely gives superiority to human beings. So this is the basic anthropocentric view where you can see that the human beings at the top of that chain, everything is below it. But this is a wrong concept. Anthropocentrism is basically, while we are talking about nature or the concept of post nature, we have to give certain priorities to nature also, because that binary between nature and culture is now not at all uh, demanding, and theorists like Claire Colebrook, Timothy Morton, or Latour, they are also talked about, or Donna Haraway. They are also talk about certain kind of interconnectedness, and so this is the right circle where human beings are with other non-human entities. But today my talk is about this wrong one. It means anthropocentrism. So what is anthropocentrism? It means people as environmental managers of sustainable global system, population control, give an equal weight to resource use, strong regulation by independent authorities required, and the people are considered as environmental managers, view the earth as a garden that needs tending, and they hold the view that the problems that are we need governments to legislate to protect an environment and the resources from over exploitation. So what is basically anthropocentrism means? Breeding man's belief of himself as the conqueror of nature, as the exploiter of nature, as the most important central being in the universe. And anthropocentric people believe that nature in existence solely for them is to use rather than there being in existence for its own sake. There, I have given a basic premise or a basic difference between anthropocentrism and ecocentrism. While we're talking about anthropocentrism, we have to keep in mind that anthropocentrism somehow directs us to talk about ecocentrism. And at the same time, we must have to remember that while we are talking about ecocentrism, it somehow draws us back towards anthropocentrism, because while if you want to avoid a certain things, and if you are talking about a certain things, it means you are knowingly or unknowingly giving importance, while ecocentrism is talking about that human and animal all should be given equal status. It means that human is always there, and basic human centeredness is anthropocentrism. It means it's about man, and while ecocentrism is about nature. It means anthropocentrism solely deals with mind, society, technology, while ecocentrism deals with natural forces. Anthropocentrism means unsustainable management of the economy and its excessive resource intensity and waste generation. Mm. As I am sharing the slides, I'm not able to see any of the participants or the actual virtual platform. So if there occurs any kind of technical glitches, please unmute your microphone and you can tell me, because otherwise I won't be able to see you. Only I am visible. This is one of the problems that we are facing. Mm, uh, So at present, I am audible and visible. You can write it down there. I am audible and visible.
Yeah, you're audible and visible, but there is a slight break in voice.
Where do I stay? I'm continuously facing this kind of problem. So it's still breaking.
No, it's
Or
okay.
it's
You
okay
carry
now.
on. You carry on.
Okay, thanks. So, and the difference between the technological reorganization and modernization of production, it means in anthropocentrism. And anthropocentrism talks about man and talks about technology, and it's the object of use and the property of man. And at the same time, anthropocentrism talks about politicians, economists, business executives, and engineers. So look at the column. We are solely talking about ourselves only, but it's not the case with ecocentrism. So environmental ethics are dwelling on two things. One is anthropocentrism, and another is non-anthropocentrism. And I'm trying to tell you that basic sequences of anthropocentrism, and while we have to tell it, we have to tell it about the Christian stewardship that I will tell you by citing some of the references from the Bible, the Genesis, and at the same time some kind of ontological studies on anthropocentrism. So that I have already told you that anthropocentric comes from the Greek word anthropos and kenton, and anthropos means human being and kenton means centered. So etymologically, anthropocentric means human centeredness. Now there are four kinds of anthropocentric. What are those? First, there are ontological anthropocentrism, epistemological anthropocentrism, epistemological anthropocentrism, and teleological anthropocentrism. Now I will tell you all those one by one. Yes, Dr. Karmakar, speak with a little space. That way you will be audible, audio breaking. I'm so sorry for that. Um, okay, I'm telling it slowly also, so that. So now, before going to Bible, about these four kinds of anthropocentrism. So Anthropocene epoch, it means an interval of geological time, and sometimes it also talks about the Homo sapiens. So this kind of Anthropocene, while I'm talking about anthropocentrism, I have to talk about Anthropocene, and this Anthropocene is a Greek word. It derives from Greek, and it means the recent age of man, Anthropocene. And although American biologist Eugene coined the term Anthropocene in the late 1980s, it is the Dutch chemist and novelist Paul Crutzen who is largely credited with bringing public attention at a conference in August 2000, as well as in a newsletter printed with the same name, Anthropocene. Now I'm going to talk about those four kinds of anthropocentrism, and the first one is ontological anthropocentrism. After giving the definition of these four kinds of anthropocentrism, I will talk about that the Western philosophical and theoretical basis of anthropocentrism. And there I will talk about the Bible. There I will talk about Plato, Aristotle, Rene Descartes, and then Kant, but I'm not sure whether my time will permit me to tell all those things or not. Let me try. So it's about ontological anthropocentrism. What does it mean? Ontological anthropocentrism presents the position of the man that he's the sole subject or the perspective of some kind of philosophical or metaphysical knowledge, and it flourished mainly in the 19th century, and it's in the 20th century with the continental philosophy. Now, if we tell about the continental philosophy, you have to talk about this existentialism and at the same time hermeneutics and Soren Kierkegaard. He is a Danish existentialist and who is also regarded as the father of existentialism. It means that and it also talks about the existence of human beings, and at the same time Nietzsche is all argues that man does not depend absolutely upon anyone, not even upon God. So it also talks about that, and William Dilche also talks about how man as an individual is not involved in some kind of history, or rather, it's not the central point of history. Um, Ludwig Feuerbach and Mark Sillard, and they are all talks about that human-centeredness. And while we are coming from that theoretical perspective, so at the same point we have to talk about Martin Heidegger, who also in Being and Time also talks about that human being is ontologically prior to anything else, and he begins his analysis by being pointing that man often loses his kind of consciousness of his own existence and responsibility for it. At the same time, Japal Satra also gives a clear distinction between human existence, that is for in that being for itself, and the existence of things. So you can see that all the Western philosophers, they are talking about the human existence. They're not talking about that that some kind of evolution of nature. And while we are thinking about Chardin, I don't know whether you have come across this theorist, but Taylor P. Chardin in particular talks about some kind of thoughts and contents that man is at the center of the universe, and he perceives himself in everything in terms of his being. He stands at the summit of the universe, and he is the arrow in flight, and by which a certain kind of psychic development is born. So man's capacity for self-consciousness, for thought, for the production of the culture has added a kind of new layer to the earth's surface, which Taylor calls us noosphere. NWS PHER in noosphere means man is on the top of the thinking layer, and while his concept of the noosphere distinct other superimposed category of nature from that biospheric level. So noosphere forms some kind of unique environment of man. Okay. Am I visible? Am I visible?
Yes, sir, you are visible, sir. You are visible.
Yes, sir, but we can't see your slide.
Ma'am, just
Slides are
pin
not visible.
SAR's presentation so that you can see his presentation, ma'am. Just pin SAR's presentation, which is in new, in another.
It's visible now? It's visible?
Yes, sir, now it's visible.
The slides are visible?
Yes, sir, now it's
Okay. So I'm talking about epistemological anthropocentrism. So whenever you will find that my slides are not visible, please unmute me and tell me, because this kind of technical glitches I'm facing. So now I'm talking about epistemological anthropocentrism, which is the position according to which a discussion of knowledge begins from analysis of consciousness, and it's a kind of position whose starting point is the human consciousness as the whole subject, and the epistemological anthropocentrism is visible in the modern history also, and in the modern philosophy also, in the works of Descartes, Locke, Leibniz, Berkeley, and Hume, and some kind of characteristic and skill found in the works of Kant and Kant 6 in the subject of meaning on which it argues that the truth of judgments doesn't consist in a correspondence of their contents and affirms or denied state of affairs that objectively exist. So epistemological anthropocentrism, it also talks about the human centeredness, and apart from Kant, that I will also discuss later, yeah, human reason is the object of philosophy, and for the knowledge of one's own self, it's the condition of this understanding of world. And while we are talking about Kant, we have to go through, or we have to go back to Fichte. So, what does Fichte try to convert? Fichte somehow followed Kant, and Fichte attempted to analyze human consciousness as an autonomous, independent of influence of natural conditions. So Fichte told that human consciousness are totally independent, and knowledge of this kind of consciousness are supposed to be the knowledge of man as a free being. So, and Fichte believes that man is responsible not only for himself but for the domains of his activity, of his society, for the entire and environment. And apart from Fichte, if we go through Hegel, and and if we tell me that according to my Hegel, rather, and that kind of Hegelian approach, their nature exists only to produce man. Is telling that and man produce history. While we are talking about Hegel, we have to talk about history. We have to talk about human history, and that human history also somehow divides of that nature and the world of the other human beings, and how human nature dominates us, and it also talks about that Cartesian projection of philosophy as if where that the body is there, and an attempt to reach at some kind of transcendental subject that is also hidden from the natural consciousness. So it's all about Hegelian concept, and apart from Hegel, where Hegel has ended, Husserl also talks about this kind of human-centric philosophy. So our consciousness is, and to some extent, also Husserl also tries to say that this kind of consciousness of ours is a kind of pure intentional subjectivity which gives meaning to the world, and Husserl comes to the point of saying that nothing is expected by the proper achievement of consciousness, and this kind of consciousness that later in my talk I will discuss how it is theoretically driven and interpreted by different Western philosophers. So, apart from it, there is another kind of anthropocentric views, that is cosmological anthropocentrism. Now, what is cosmology? It means cosmological anthropocentrism. It means some kind of theory, and according to which humans occupy a privileged place in this cosmos, and in some kind of natural order. And in astrophysics and in cosmology, this theory refers to the philosophical argument and some kind of observations of physical universe that must be compatible with some kind of consciousness, and some kind of observations that means that the humans are best fit for some kind of physical universe, and there exists there with a purpose, with a meaning, and the fundamental physical elements necessitate some kind of human beings, and and it also accommodated their conscious life. So this kind of cosmological anthropocentrism also believe in the fact that the universe fundamental constants happen to fall within the narrow range of thought to allow life, and all the humans are at the center of this cosmos. So cosmological anthropocentrism is formulated as a kind of response to a series of observations, and the laws of nature and the parameters of the universe on the values to some certain values that we know and how we are observing ourselves in this art. Apart from this, there is another kind of anthropocentrism, that is teleological anthropocentrism. So, when we're talking about a teleological anthropocentrism, we are yes, I will change the slide because I haven't go through that Bible one, and my slides doesn't tell so many things it about that. It's a kind of graphical journey. All the visible world can be there. So someone else is also presenting her screen or his screen. I'm requesting him to stop his screen. Okay. So about and what is telos? Now let me tell you what is telos. Telos means a goal. And as such, teleology signifies goal directedness, or it's a kind of purposefulness. So etymologically, again, teleological anthropocentrism means that everything is made for the sake of humanity. What is the goal? To achieve something for the human beings, for the evolution, not for the evolution of others, and all the evolution of the animals and plants and the other non-human objects are for the benefit or for the goal-oriented purpose of human beings. So teleological activities, it's some kind of mechanical activities, is a purpose that is goal oriented, that is controlled, and in this kind of teleological order that introduces some kind of person structure that is fitted to serve some purpose. So while we are talking about this kind of teleological anthropocentrism that upholds the world, that owes its existence to human beings and to operate in accordance with a certain plan to some benefit for the human beings, for the intelligibility of the human beings, it also talks about some other kind of importance, and there are valid some kind of valid reasons that why human beings has a place of some importance, and or at least what I can say according to Sri Aurobindo or Aurobindo Ghosh. All come across the name, and his concept of terrestrial evaluation, where it talks about that esoterically and teleologically we can indeed speak of human kingdom, and this is the reason of the uniqueness for some kind of human species and some kind of kingdom like this. Apart from this, there is also moral anthropocentrism. So moral anthropocentrism mainly talks about but two versions, that human beings in this world, they are some kind of carry some kind of environmental ethics, they are carrying some kind of philosophy, and and it also talks about two things, that is absolute moral anthropocentrism and relatively moral anthropocentrism. So anthropocentric view, which suggests that only humans have the intrinsic value and assigns absolutely no value to non-human species, is what we call anthropocentrism in its absolute sense. So this kind of absolute moral anthropocentrism only talks about the human intrinsic value, and at the same time this view of absolute anthropocentrism permits us of a kind of two things. First of all, this anthropocentric view also suggests that the human have greater intrinsic value than other human species, and it is characterized as a relatively anthropocentric phenomena, and we claim, for example, that the humans are always superior in culture, and they realize a greater range of values that the numbers of the non-human species, and might claim that this kind of unprecedented capacity to create some kind of ethical system, it imparts worth to other life forms, but we are not doing that. So upon this demise of these 4 or 5 kinds of anthropocentrism, let me tell you that this view is nothing new. because it upholds the interest of the expense of other non-human interest. And for most part, this attitude has been justified. How it is justified? It is justified like the philosophers like Aristotle, Descartes, Immanuel Kant, and the Judeo-Christian belief. We have to read those critically. We have to evaluate those, and it affords the view that everything that exists at the disposal of man, and man is the superior thing. Man is there. Without man, nothing can be achieved. And non-human nature has just some kind of value, and it has no intrinsic value. And this point is further elaborated by M.F. Fox. That means Michael Allen Fox, and when he claims that animal can be exploited because we are superior to them. So anthropocentric ethicist and anthropocentric elitist hold the view that the member of all species are not equal, and anthropocentrism describes the tendency of human beings to regard themselves as the central and most significant entities in the world. Now, this kind of human-centered epoch has its origin from the Bible, or not the origin, that the Bible also there, it is thoroughly mentioned. So now let me tell you, this is the Bible, and the concept and the importance of the anthropocentric approaches to environmental ethics. That anthropocentrism refers to the superiority of humans as compared to animals, and the humans are superior to animals, could be independent. How we are justifying it? No, see that the Bible itself supports the anthropocentric perspective that humans are the only things that matter of are. But we can see here that the human beings, at the expense of everything, it is the human beings that is there, and this mirror where God can see what God is seeing. What see here? God is there. God is seeing whose image? Our image. And it is mentioned where? In the Genesis 1.27. And then all the Psalms that now I'll read. It's about God creates man and women. Are the slides are visible? Because I will read now.
No, sir,
here.
the slides
are visible, I guess.
It is very small. The slide is visible, but the letters are very
small.
We cannot read it.
Sir, we can zoom the screen. If we want, we can in our own, and it will be readable.
Is it now? Okay.
No, sir, little more.
Is it okay?
No, we cannot. We can see the slide, but we cannot read it. The letters are very small. No.
Is it okay now?
Okay, a little bit okay. Yes, okay, good.
Is it okay? Okay. So what is there? It's about the God creates man and women. God said, let us make man in our own image, in the likeness of our universe, and let them be masters of the fish, of the sea, the birds of heaven, the cattle, all the wild beasts, and all the reptiles that can crawl upon the earth. God creates man in the image of himself. Read the lines. God created man in the image of himself. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So, what he is trying to convey? That be fruitful, he is also telling in Genesis 1.28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky. He is commanding man to rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over everything living thing that moves on the earth. Now let me read a particular section from Bible. All go through. So I'm reading. While he's a kind of, now I'm not going to discuss how he created the world, how he created man, because it's a then I have to tell you the whole episode or the Psalms of Bible. Now those particular Psalms it's in 24, 25th, and more precisely 26, 27, 28. That 25. God make the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to the kinds, and all the creatures that move alone and ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Now then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, let them rule over the fish. And at the same time, he is telling that God blessed human beings and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, fill the earth and control the earth, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And again, that I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has sweet seed in it. They will be yours for food. And all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. So it can be easily discernible that God is there. God tried to convey that Bible narrates that the creation of heaven and living creatures, non-living beings, and everything by the hands of God, and God has created human beings and told human beings to control, to subdue, to dominate all the other beings. And let me tell you that God took 7 days in completing the creation of the earth, and in the beginning, earth was some kind of formless void covered by darkness all over it, and then God made a day, then God made night, and by creating light, and it separated from darkness. God created heaven, and there was water above the heaven, as well as under the heaven, and the water under the heaven formed a kind of single mass, and so there also appeared dry land, which he called as earth. So I'm not going to tell you how the earth was created. And in all those things, and in Psalm 27, 26, 28 that I've just read, you can see that God orders human beings to subdue nature or earth as such. From whatever is said about it, it follows that some kind of Christian ideology advocates a very strong anthropocentric ethics, and for this implies that the non-human nature exists only to serve the of human beings. And if we dig down the passage of time, that further we find to our surprise that even before the Bible, there are traces of anthropocentric ideas in whom? In Socrates, in Plato, and Aristotle. So let me talk about something about Plato. Let me change the slide. There I am telling, it's some kind of Platonic words, and while Plato has given us some kind of aggressive anthropocentric views, and Plato's anthropocentric views are authoritative, dominatic, and based on certain regions, and it designed with nature, and how it is connected four sides with Aristotle. Also given the name of the theorist whom you can go through to read there. You will come to know that how Plato's anthropocentric views are hugely connected to Aristotle, as Aristotle used to be a student of Plato. So Plato talks about that enabling activity of violence. Here I am again zooming. That spirited that enabling activities and volition that are rational, enabling intelligence and self-control. At the same time, it's associated with reason, mind, and it's some kind of opinion located in man who are thus able to rule. And it's some kind of appetitive. It means that it is associated with the pleasure, pain, desire, as well as possibly located in the rules. So Plato also talks about the human-centeredness, and at the same time, Aristotle talks about human-centeredness. So before going to the notions of Aristotle, let me talk about something about Plato. So we have to we have to remember one thing, that man possesses the unique characteristics of rationality. And but why this kind of rationality is considered to be creation for the value of man? According to classical thinkers, man is a complex being with having a range of both physical needs, emotional needs, and passions. And this kind of needs are considered to be the lower parts of our being, that to be guided by some kind of soul. Note the word soul. We could talk a lot about the soul. And the soul of human beings are rational in nature. This is the highest level of our being. And as such, this rational soul has an important function to guide the lower parts of our being. And most probably, this rational soul guide us and guide others to serve us. So Plato, who used to be the student of Socrates, held that the rational soul is like some kind of charioteer who drives two horses. Now I'm telling you a story. I'm giving you an analogy. This rational soul is a kind of charioteer, and who is driving two horses. Both the horses are untamed, and those are unruly also. So in this analogy, the two horses represent our lower parts, and one represent our physical needs, one horse, and another horse is our passions. And the leading of the horse depend on the charioteer and how he controls them. That how the charioteer will control physical needs and at the same time the passion. And similarly, according to Plato, both the lower parts of our need constantly checked, should be checked and controlled. And this is possibly only through the rational soul man can possess that. Man can control, man can check his emotions, because man has the rational soul. Human beings have that. Non-human entities don't have that. That is why they are not compared with the equal status of human beings. It's the rational soul which gives value to man. It's the charioteer can control those two horses. So the quality of the rationality is what makes man thinking is a kind of special characteristic. Who has indeed made it very clear on the importance of man's rationality through this kind of illustration that I've just given. And however, apart from this, clearly getting through some other kind of point that without rationality, man can't do anything. And though Plato uses some kind of examples of the charioteer and the horses as some kind of mere analogy to convey his stand on man's rationality in the process of referring the horses as unruly and in need of being controlled. He would not have illustrated in the first place if he did not consider animals capable of controlling them. To see that two kind of horses, those horses are the animals, and the charioteer. In the other alternate reading, we can also tell that those two horses are the animals. We, the charioteers, are controlling the horses. So in any terms, we are controlling our minds, we are controlling our emotions, at the same time we are controlling other non-human entities. And it is all going through because we have that some kind of rational soul. So Plato leaves this talks this Dias for Aristotle, one of his most favorite students. And if we want to read more about Plato, I will tell you to read about Lawrence and his attitude of Plato and the most other thinkers towards the real animals. But I think much of the same. And the natural function of the animals were to be ruled by rational beings. Human are there and animal beings are there to serve the interest of human beings. And putting differently, Plato's view on the horses, though they were analogical, held the view that even in reality, a view wherein man held a higher position and animals only for a instrumental purpose that is there for to serve us. So Aristotle took Plato's concept of rational soul as his point of departure, and he talks about his concept or his theory of soul and his hierarchy of souls. So you have to go through Aristotle two texts on this, one on politics and one on the souls. So Aristotle talks about three kinds of souls. What are those? Let me again zoom in. Um, yes. So there are three kinds of souls. Those are plants. Plants are vegetative soul. Then the animals, they have the sensitive soul, and the humans, they have the rational soul. And at the same time, Aristotle's hierarchy of souls that you can see in the book 2, chapter 3 of On the Soul, that mind is there. Then there is three kind of layers like locomotive one, appetite one, then the sensory one, and then last that nutritive one. And his hierarchy of souls. Hierarchy of souls, it means, let me again tell you by zooming in, vegetative or nutritive soul that I have discussed this nutritive. It means possessed by plants, allows only growth, assimilation of food and reproduction. And then the some kind of sensitive soul possessed by animals, but only plants, organism with a sensitive soul sense and respond to the environment, experience and have only a memory. And last, the rational soul, that is the human beings, possessed only by humans and adds thinking and rational thought to the functions of the other two souls. Now, let me talk about a bit about animals and feelings. So while talking, but before that, and while we are talking about how the animals are considered as machines, I have to talk about Descartes. But before it, I'm going to tell you something about Aristotle also, and his notion of the souls that I've just mentioned. Just shown you that the diagram of the hierarchy of souls. That he talks about that some kind of language that human beings are far more superior things, and he discusses his hierarchy of soul in his treatise on the soul, where he explains that three kinds of soul: vegetative one, sensitive one, and the rational one. And the rational soul is the highest in the hierarchy of souls that which we have. And he considered man to be valued by the possession of this kind of rationality and the rationalistic characteristic of order. And only man is the supreme. Man has the supreme value. He also, like Plato, held that the role of man is to guide and control non-rational part of our nature. That means the vegetable soul. And besides this, he makes an important point that the highest good for our lower nature is to serve the good of our divine rational soul. And here it can be pointed out that the term lowest at times he used, and for the non-human beings, he used the term lowest, and for the higher human beings, it means for us, he used the term highest. This being the case, also he is trying to show about that animals being only a part of the lower strata of the society or the nature are there to serve only the interest of the humans. That is, they have no other value. So this fact that man is being referred here as the higher being and animal is referred here as the lower being. And only is the outlook on the status of man and animal. But we have to think why we are doing this distinction. Why are animals being referred as the lower being of the society? Why we are so much careless about this, and we are only trying to think about the hierarchy of the souls that we have. At the same time, Aristotle, in his Politics, talks about that plants exist for the benefits of animals, and some animals exist for the benefit of us. What are the two? So those in his Politics, he also talked about that those which are domesticated and serves as for the human beings, for as well as for food, wild animals in most cases is not there. All the other things are there to serve us, to flourish us. Not only food, but other kind of assistance also. And what are the other kinds of assistance? That means by clothing, by similar aids of life. So animals are there to help us in vivid way. And according to Aristotle, if nature makes nothing purposeless or in vain, all the animals must have been there by nature for the sake of man. Thus, he seems to argue that nature has some kind of hierarchical structure where human being stays at the top of it, and those of the lesser reasoning ability, they exist only for the sake of those who have higher abilities. And human beings have ability, as Aristotle he declares that man is a rationally biped being. And it's evident that his writing, he always believes about the superiority of human beings on non-human, and he talks about that God has made all living beings and non-living beings and non-living beings for the living beings. And for the living beings, it means only he's talking about the man, his kind of rational soul. And God's only purpose to create non-human nature is to serve man. So, a kind of parallel thought of the line that there is a kind of anthropocentric view that was there in the case of Plato also. That is the same with Aristotle also. And so we can see that the influence of Bible and Aristotle on Western civilization, on Western other thinkers or the philosophers were rapid, were vivid, and were praiseworthy. And here I would like to suggest you to go through John Passmore's book, that is Man's Responsibility for Nature, Ecological Problem, and Western Tradition, to take a look about the Western views of this kind of activity. So where Socrates, Plato, or Aristotle clearly states about the rationality of human beings, about the steps of human beings, about the hierarchy of human soul. So this is the very basic point for very basic foundation for other critical thinkers who have continued to influence us, and among one philosopher who took the status of man's rationality to another level. He was the father of modern Western philosophy. Yes, I'm talking about Descartes, and while I'm talking about Descartes, I have to talk about that kind of rationality, because he is only talking about the rationality, which is the guiding principle of his kind of continental westernized human epoch-centric philosophy, and in fact that the foundation of his philosophy lies on the reason alone, and his reason is the central to his some kind of conception that what a human is and what other, and he is extremely well expressed in the one single line, that the talk of that is the basic premise or theme of my talk also. That is why I have given that I in the title within the bracket. Introspection. It means I means we the human beings, we should introspect others. It's that cogito ergo sum. It means I think, therefore I exist. It's only like that. Animals can't think. Plants don't have the capacity to think. Only the human beings have the capacity to think. That is why I have titled my talk as necessitating introspection. That I'm talking about us, that cogito ergo sum. So now let's move on to Renere. Rajuji, can I take another 30 minutes?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
Okay. Thanks. So, while I'm talking about Descartes, we've talked about animals, we've talked about their feelings, and we've talked about how animals are perceived as machines. So, before going to it, and this Descartes termed as animata, I'm to tell you about the basic foundations of Descartes, so that my students can read Descartes in a far better way, to understand that his ontological ideas of thinking animals as machines. Yes, at the same time, I'm not talking about the post-apocalyptic world. Yes, means because while we are talking about humanoid, or while we are talking about that how the animals are termed as machines, we immediately calls on those kind of texts like Curtis Road or Dixon and Craig of Atwood. But here the machines are not like that. So the main contention of the Bible and the view of Aristotle on life and environment of or human beings, you troll on the West, and we find a lot of influence on the philosophical foundations or on the philosophers also. And for instance, Descartes is who is also known as the father of modern Western philosophy, was very much influenced by Bible and Aristotle, and was conceived that God made human beings, and although men and animals resemble each other only in the respect of possessing a body which performs as some kind of functions, yet men are superior to animals by virtue of their reasoning power, and which comes to the possession of some kind of rational soul. So Descartes also believes that God has created the human body and added to it the rational soul. Thus, the body performs every function except thinking, that which is the sole function of that soul. Consequently, and as a result, what it will be? Only human beings can reason, and no other living beings can do so. So Descartes, in order to make the above point clear, compared man and animal with machines. He said that if we could make a machine which has all the organs of animals, then it would be identical, and that animal in all respect. But if we make a machine exactly similar to a human body, then they would not be identical, on two grounds: that we can say that a machine is not a human being, first of all, and secondly, that machine can't utter the purpose of communication as is done by the human. So we can see that humans can be the machines, because human can utter words, human can be transformed. We can easily identify that this is the machine and this is the human being, because human being can speak. But he's compared that an animal can be a machine, because like the machine or like the animal, machine can also react, machine can also speak. So moreover, if it is so, he's to make clear to utter words in response. So uttering words is the main primitive criteria or main prime criteria for Descartes to make a clear distinction between humans and the machine, machines none other than the animals. And so, but moreover, it can't also be made as to reply to some kind of his thinking, and he also thinks that machines do not act by some kind of understanding, and only by the disposition of their organs, where human beings act with their reason, and we have to instruct the machines to act, not in the case with the human. So, and we have to instruct the animals to act. So animals are like some kind of machines. So reason is the powerful faculty possessed by human beings alone. And while he's talking about that man can act in any situation by the virtue of reason. On the contrary, human beings, on the basic premises, reason being absent in a machine cannot act in every situation. A machine can act only according of the disposal of their organs, and the organs of machines have to be arranged in a particular way to act on a particular occasion. So since they cannot be insurmountably devices for arranging the organs for other occasions of life, it can be said that machines have life. And so by these two methods, it says that we can recognize the difference between man and the animal. Descartes presupposes that the animals have no language, they have no reason, since human beings cannot recognize them. So he holds that only human can use words to communicate with each other. So and can pronounce words by imitating and animals. What they can do, some animals like parrots or other some animals like dogs, they to some extent they can pronounce words by imitating humans. So we are there to instruct them, yet they cannot speak like us, and because they do not think what they say. So again, the humans uh, 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 can have that rational activities, can have that soul that animals don't have. So if animals had any language, they would have been able to make themselves understand by us and their fellow species, but in reality we don't find so. So in our view, or we can say that yes, to some extent, Descartes' views on man and animals that has been indeed been previously highlighted on his talks, and while he talks about animal as he's being considered as a rather Hart's view, and to some extent he explains it by the rational mechanism and he says that even more ingenious mechanical toys with the lesser kinds of being to amuse us, animals don't have the capacity to amuse us. So animals can't do anything like the machines also do. So they have don't they are lacking that kind of capacity also. So it's a very problematic thing, and he is telling that his status of the man animal is being considered by many as a view that has widened the perspective gap between humanity and non-human world on an unprecedented extent. Others can hold that, unfortunately for some animals, science adopted this view and that they exist period for some scientists. But Descartes' view that the exploitation of animals cannot be wrong. It's true. But they can do any harm, like the robots of the sack of potatoes, which only possess some kind of thoughts. They have no feeling or a sense brain. And Descartes used the term thought to mean consciousness. And since animals are not thinking beings, they are not conscious. And at the same time, in his work of principle of philosophy, he also writes that he understands that we are conscious in operating certain things, but the animals are not. They are unable to do any kind of thing, and they are only there to act like machines. They are like some kind of animata. What he is saying, and he also talks that man can make various automata also which moves without thought, and nature should produce its own automata, much like the splendid artificial one. So the animals are like automata. They are called as automata. They are some kind of automatic beings like machines which we have to trigger, or we have to give something to instruct, and they cannot reason, they cannot feel pain, they are like the robots. And it needs to point it out that Descartes did consider animals as living organic creatures. He didn't deny life to animals, but he denies all thought, by which means he is consciousness to animals and thinking that cannot be enjoyed by those who do not have the rationality. And according to him, animals are thoughtless brutes, like automata, machines, that despite their appearances, they are not aware of anything, and don't hear, don't smell, don't taste, don't feel heat or cold. In fact, Descartes goes on to state that they do not even experience of hunger or of thirst. For him, animals are like clocks, and clocks can keep better time, but like clocks, they are not conscious. And further, animals are considered as incapable of suffering also. So it is believed that the conditions of animals reach their lowest point during the time of Descartes. And so Descartes is telling that physically animals are very much like people, but some basic design, basic organs there are. So let me again zoom in the slide. All animals, contrary to the received view, there is no evidence that Descartes holds the thesis that animals do not suffer. They are telling that we have to go through Descartes' treatment of animals. Animals could be a machine with feeling, some kind of. They are also telling, but the main point is that the body is a machine, the soul is immaterial. Animals are bodies without souls. They are the pure machines. Nor will they appear at the strange of those who are acquainted with the variety of movements performed by the different automata. Animals are considered as automata by Descartes that I have mentioned, are moving machines fabricated by the human industry. Such persons will look upon this body as a machine made by the hands of God. Because it is possible to have bodies without souls, mechanical functioning without rational intelligence, we can see that the soul is something extra given to us by God. See the line, soul is something extra that is given to us, to the human beings by God. God only gave rational souls to people. So this is the view. This is the automata view, or the mechanic or the machinistic view of animals according to Descartes. It is the automatic duck. Then what is this? This is a mechanical fish according to Descartes. Wait a bit. This is a mechanical rabbit. All are machines because animals are machines. And what is this? This is a tortoise, all are the machines. So we can see that how animals are given their inferior position by philosophers like Descartes. So is Descartes wrong? This is the question. How do we know that animals are conscious? The problem of our minds. Arguments from analogy, we can talk that, we can tell that animals are like us physically. Animals act like us in response to hunger, pain, comfort. Yes, very weak argument, but who knows that to what point in our evolutionary history consciousness evolved? Perhaps it evolved only in hominids as a result of our ability to reflect on our own thoughts. And sleepwalkers can exhibit pain response, pain avoidance behavior without consciousness. So yes, to some extent, we can say before going to Kantian theory, let me tell something more about Descartes. So I also think so. While he is telling that he strongly believes that the animal cannot reason, but it's not true. He is also telling that animals do not have a mind because reason resides only in mind, and animals don't have mind. So how reasons will be there? Animals completely fail to perform certain actions which are done by humans, and the suggestion is that animals do not have a rational soul and nature that made the animals supposed to behave accordingly to the disposition of their organs. At the same time, in his view, he could tell me that animals are some kind of analogous to clocks, and that I have also mentioned. Further mentioning it for the students that yes, while the clocks are composed of the wheels and all the animals that in the pictures are composed, they are composed of some kind of wheels and springs and can only count hours and can only measure time more accurately than men. So similarly, animals can perform some kind of actions better than us in some situations, and again they completely fail to perform in some other situations. This provides that animals are not rational, and further human beings have a rational soul, and his soul is intimately joined and united with his body, and this soul not the death of our body. Furthermore, if we go through the other works of Descartes, supposedly in mainly his discourse on method, and if we go through the parts, the sixth section, Descartes advocates some kind of practical philosophy also. The reason behind this some kind of practical philosophy is the preservation of the health, is the higher good of mankind, and the foundation of some kind of other goods in life. In those days, philosophy was merely speculative, but Descartes emphasized the need for practical philosophy also. And he said practical philosophy includes some kind of knowing the nature and the behavior of the environment, which includes some kind of water, fire, air, and also the purpose of which they are suited to serve us. So it means all are there to serve us, and we will employ all our skills to use the environment, and so make ourselves the masters and the main possessors of nature. So we could make every efforts in inventing such kind of devices as to enjoy the fruits of agriculture, fruits of nature, fruits of other things, and at the same time, everything is there for our exploitation. We have to certain to ourselves by exploiting, by subjugating, by domesticating others. And the most important among such devices, one such medicine. Medicine can convert only our health, which is the basic of all goods. So medicine can cure us from any disease and make us more wiser and more clever. So he is also talking about medicine in his discourse of method. So to elucidate that Descartes conceives the world as a huge machine with the human beings as the puppet. Of course, Descartes never claims that nature exists as something ready-made for man, but man's task is to transform nature and make himself the master and the possessor of nature. The mechanistic model of nature is followed by Newton also, and the Cartesian distinction between body and the mind leads scientists like Newton to treat also the matter as dead and also completely separate it from mind. So so to see the world from a multitude of different objects that is assembled to make a huge machine. So Newton also held a such kind of mechanistic worldview and constructed his mechanism only on the basis and made the foundation of his some kind of classical physics, which dominated the scientific world up to the end of 19th century. So, so Descartesian philosophy to some extent talks about that human dominated view, and this human dominated view can immediately link us to Immanuel Kant. Kant bringing us some kind of Copernican evolution in philosophy as one of the most influential philosophers of the West. And now we'll go through the last section of my talk, that is Kantian ethics, so which can be constructed as one of the anthropocentric model in nature. This is Kantian theory. So Kant also talks about human being, that only humans driven by the moral impulses can stand back of own desires. So only humans have will. Animals do not have will, neither bad or good, so they do not have any intrinsic value. This is the same thing all are repeated, but they are trying to tell you from their different theoretical perspective, from their philosophical perspective. Animals are there to be treated well only because otherwise the humans being is harmed. Our duties towards animals are merely indirect duties towards human beings. So it is the basic premises of Kantian theory, and the Kantian theory talks about this primary formula that we can tell in the groundwork to the metaphysics of mortals. And Kant also held a human dominated view, and according to him that humans occupy a higher place and non-humans don't. He also held that animals cannot act morally and hence they don't deserve some kind of moral status. But what's the relation between this kind of deserving moral status and acting in a different way? Kant's ethics can be viewed and criticized in some kind of insensitive way. It is rather insensitive to environment. But he is his thinking also that all the animals do not deserve human beings, they- because animals are there only to serve the human being. They are not there to understand or to give or to take the support. So for him, animals are there for the greater need of human being, and the moral value of acting of principle is suspended in the media unless there is some kind of moral value to give one's principle moral content. And at the same time, the moral content that Kant is again trying to convey is prescribed to treat us in a some in his own end in themselves, but somehow all here is known into animals, only include human beings within his periphery. So again, critics like Lawrence talked about why Kant is not taking animals, and the answer is lies in the fact that Kant called human beings with the moral status as the members of the kingdom ends the only with those who are capable of thinking, who have the principles of reason, and animals are excluded from the kingdom of ends only to imply that they are not considered to act as principle of end in themselves. So reason forms a certain kind of core foundation for Kantian perception on the moral status of man and animals, and thus Kant also establishes the rationality as a giving value to some kind of moral principle. And while explaining this kind of end in themselves formula, Kant speaks about two things. He speaks about or he also differentiate between things and persons. So you have to go through Kantian notion of things and Kantian notion of persons. He believes that the things have only that extreme
Sir, unmute your mic, sir. Dr. Gautam, unmute your mic, please.
Yes. Hmm. So extremely sorry for the inconvenience and the technical glitches. Connection is not there, so I'm going to end the talk that according to Kant also, and Kant also talks about that the two perceptions, and if we go through his critique of judgment also, there also we'll come to see that his notions of this kind of philosophy, where he also talks that human are there to exploit nature, we are all here to exploit nature, and Kant, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and all other Western philosophers of the then period, they have talked that humans are there, human will exploit the other animal beings and the non-human entities. So, and we are not in a position to be dominated by nature. So this is the basic premises of anthropocentric views, which in later are critiqued by ecocentric views, or the epistemological definitions of deep ecology, or now in this post-Cartesian context, or post-Kantian era, we are talking about post-nature also, that clearly breaks that or tries to erase that distinction between human and culture, nature and culture, nature and human binary, and is talking about that we are connected to everything. So this was the primary basis or the rudimentary knowledge of my talk on anthropocentrism. And sorry for the technical glitches. So that's all. Yes. Is there
Thank
any
you.
kind of... Okay.
Thank you very much,
Yes,
sir,
yes.
for enlightened and powerful presentation, sir. Thank you.
Welcome, and I'm extremely sorry for the technical glitches. And if you want that PPT, I will definitely share that PPT with C. Raju sir, so that he can share that with students or the other academicians who are in need of that PPT. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you. This is the time to discussion. The session
Participants can unmute yourself, and if you have any queries, please unmute yourself and ask to the resource person, or else you can post it in the chat box too.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
are.
Sir, I have a question. Would you consider Darwin to be the first ever person to usher in post-anthropocentrism in his Origin of the Species, because there he dismantles the Christian golden chain?
To some extent, while you were talking about Darwin, he's talking about this kind of post-anthropocentric views, where talking not only about the humans, he's talking about the animals, and he's talking about the survival instinct of us, that those who will have the ability to transfer themselves, to adopt the changes, they only will be there. So Darwinian mode of evaluation also talks about this kind of cyborg theory, those kind of post-humanistic epistemologies, where human beings will be also some kind of robot also, or the humanoid or the animanoid will be there, where actually animals were will there with greater powers, with a kind of supernatural powers, or they can act by breaking the traditional norms of other animals. So yes, Darwinian notion can definitely deconstruct this kind of anthropocentric views which only prioritize the superiority of human beings.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Hello, Gautam da. This is Shoykot. Am I audible?
Aha. Yes.
I have few observations. First of all, thank you very much for the wonderful session. Uh,
Welcome.
the observations that I would like to tell you is at the very beginning you had referred to a word worldview, right?
Yes.
Worldview. In this regard, there's this essay by Derrida, the reality of the universals. Here I have a observation regarding the binary between the essence and the existence. Whenever you talk about Sartre, there has been this idea of that existence precedes essence.
What is your question?
Yes, don't you consider that if existence precedes essence, then it essentially concretizes the anthropocentrism instead of dismantling it?
No, while we are talking about Sartre and while he is talking about this existence precedes essence physical in its no existent nausea, he is talking about the condition of human beings thinking about the rationality or thinking about the existential pattern of human beings, and the basic example of it, I can tell you that if we go through that the story of metamorphosis, when he was human beings, his existence was somewhat some kind of different things, but when he turns to some kind of vermin or some kind of insect, there his essence fails to provide him that kind of existence. By nature, inherently, he was the human being with the human soul. He can think, he can feel, he can act, but only because of his outward nature that is thoroughly not that is beyond the norms of human beings. So he faces that existential problem, and ultimately he commits suicide or he dies at the end of the story. So it is very much essential for thinking that while we are talking about essence of that gives existence a norm, we have to talk about the human beings, because we have that ability, we have the capability to think, to act, to react, to give our existence as an essence. And so in those texts also, in Nausea or in No Exit also, he talks or he provided example by citing the images of that waiter, by citing that images of that lady. He hasn't taken a lot of images of the human or of the non-human entities like the animals and so on. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So there is a question in the chat box. Where does anthropocentrism stands on postmodern philosophy of body loss simulations?
I'm unable to get your question. So many noises are there.
Yes, sir. Now it is okay. So there is a question from Kajal Jha. Where does anthropocentrism stands on postmodern philosophy of body lots simulation that has a viewpoint of human mind as machines, simulacrum and simulations?
To some extent, while rather I will tell you that anthropocentrism, while from Descartes taking that machine or taking this conception that simulation and simulacrum, while we are copying and we don't have that actual image before us, we are the copying something, then we are talking about some kind of machines, because they are, or some kind of incidents, because they are Baudelaire talked it by citing the examples of water kingdom. or citing the examples of America's Independence Day, or or to some extent that breaking of the World Trade Center. So definitely there some kind of non-human entities are used to enact this kind of simulacra, to enact this kind of copy, or to enact this kind of hyper real situation. At the same time, while he is talking about human mind as machines, post-apocalyptic philosophy or post-humanist philosophy is definitely talking about this thing only, that we have to be there, and the human beings will become some kind of machine, and our human beings will be some kind of superhuman beings, and they will enact for the survival of themselves, they will evaluate, they will modify themselves. So obviously human mind as machines have a different connotations, and while we are talking about simulacra or hyper reality or copying something, it has a different phenomena. But yes, that hyper reality, that mechanism, we can somehow connect it to Descartesian notion of animals as human beings, as machines. Any more question?
Thank you, sir. So, yet another question from Pommy Cotton. As you were talking about
As you're
teleology,
talking
do
about
you consider?
yes, I'm ready.
Okay, sir.
Do you consider teleological and from a Marxist point of view to be a ludicrous idea that a communist and can never be reached as a whole society? For this, I need to deliver a talk for 1 hour. For this wonderful question for me, yes, I'm just giving a certain clue for it. While we are talking about teleological thing, while we are talking about certain goal-oriented thing, and from the Marxist point of view, where this kind of animals to some extent can be compared with the proletariat, who are serving for whom? The elitist. It means the human being. So yes, to some extent, we can connect the idea uh, that the proletariat are the body without organs. They are selling their product, which they are making. At the same time, they are selling it, and they are again buying their own product with a huge amount of money. So it's a chain of cycle, that capitalistic production, that makes certain human beings a certain kind of machine which are only performing acts for a certain another kind of society. I can take a whole day to talk about on this, but I hope you can understand that yes, that proletariat can be the animals, that the elitist can be we, the human beings. Next question. Is there any more question?
No, sir. But Janapriyan Kamarajan asks you to recommend any books for this anthropocentrism.
Okay. That I will share my slide, and there also in the end I have also recommended a reading list. I will share the slides with you all, so that you can also say send it, or you can also recommend it others also.
Thank
I
you, sir.
will.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have a
Participant.
question. Sir, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Recently, for example, during this pandemic, anthropocentric enthusiasts are having the perception that nature has got its regeneration time, and this pandemic is one of such times, and still believe that human has got all the powers to exploit nature for their own, utilitarian value. So, what is your view on it, sir?
Yes, human beings are exploiting nature. Till date, human beings are exploiting nature. Not to the, if you are talking about this anthropocentric attitude in this pandemic condition also. If
Yes,
you
sir.
are talking about this condition also, yes, till now we are doing it. Till now, we are being served by the animal world. But to some extent, now we have become conscious also of our activities. That is why we are trying to focus on plantation also, tree plantation also. Also, we are trying to focus on those trees which are uprooted during the cyclone, and we are trying to reroot it. So to some extent, we have become aware of our inhuman activities, but human beings are only like it. We are all exploiting the nature, the mother nature, for our own benefit. But at the same time, the ecological studies or the deep ecological studies or non-anthropocentric views or the environmentalists, always they are trying their best to make ourselves aware of this fact that we have to be more cautious, that we have to do justice with our activities, and we have to be less anthropocentric in nature, more ecocentric in our action.
Thank you, sir. Any
Thank
other
you, sir.
question from
Thank
the
you for the
participant?
answer. And sir, I have one more question. Like when we are talking about this anthropocentrism being opposed by ecocentrism or biocentrism, can we add Latour's actor network theory in the list of
Yes,
these
obviously, absolutely. Yes,
non-anthropocentric
yes.
discourses?
Non-anthropocentric, yes. Lato's actor network theory. We can talk about Timothy Morton and his conception of mesh. Also, we can connect Donna Haraway and and her conception while he's talking, keeping in mind the uh, human-centric activities of our beloved dog. So yes, all these are interconnected. All these are leading us to the era of post-nature. And definitely, these are the part of non-anthropocentric activities. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from the participants?
Hello, sir. Is it audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can ask, sir.
Sir, just can you please differentiate Anthropocene and anthropocentrism? Because Anthropocene, to some extent, is talking about the human activity which is dominant on the climate and environmental at this condition, in a geological age. So, can you please
Yes,
differentiate the both?
it's almost the same. While both are the terms talks about the human epoch, while Anthropocene is giving stress to human-centered activities. Anthropocentrism is the whole term. It seems like the ecology and the ecological studies, ecocentric activities and ecocentrism. These are the part of the whole era or the whole domain where human beings are there to exploit others. But Anthropocene means there that in that geological territory, so many other human activities also comes to the fore. And anthropocentrism here also, we talked about mainly the rationality of human beings or the intrinsic value of our soul. So more or less, they are same to some extent.
Oh, thank you, sir. Can we trace any other any of these anthropocentric ideas or thoughts in our Indian philosophy? Like, if there is an thesis, there will be an antithesis. So that because Indian philosophy is basically a
yes, look, this is the question where yes, not in a single sentence, I won't be able to answer this. You can have my mail ID, you can answer this, and later I can elaborately tell you that in which text you can get all these anthropocentric attitudes, all that anthropocentric views, or immediately if you want to go through some novels, I can tell you go through the novels of Amitabh Ghosh. To some extent, there you can see some kind of anthropocentric attitudes there, or you can go through all the ecocentric novels. I can tell you that you can go through Nectar Initiative or some other novels where you can see that nature-centered analogies here are there. Thank you. But if you want to know more, you can text me or you can mail me. My mail ID is already there, so I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, very happy.
Okay, thank you very much for elaborative and detailed answers, sir. Now we are moving on to the end of the session. May I now call upon Dr. Devaki Ma'am, Assistant Professor of English and Organizing Secretary of this program, Yadava College, to propose vote of thanks. Ma'am, the session is over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ratnam sir. And good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to express my gratitude to our resource person, Dr. Karmakar. Sir, your lecture, right from the beginning, cared about the need for the new manner of thinking of human beings, about their superiority towards the universe as a rational soul, explaining from Plato, Aristotle, and in Bible, how God created man and woman as masters of ecology, not only to enjoy, but also to preserve. You also explained the Kantian theory and human binary. Thank you for sharing so much within the limited time, sir. We are much obliged to you. I also thank our participants for your exuberant participation. Thank you, one and all.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. Okay,
Thank you, Dr.
Thanks.
Karmakar. From my part, I must thank you a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your warm invitation and thanks for everything. I'm very much looking forward to our academic collaboration in future also.
Thank you,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
A kind notice to the participants, the feedback link already posted in chat box. People are requested to fill the feedback form. This recorded lecture will be uploaded on our department YouTube channel. The channel name is Department of English, aided Yadava College. Once again, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we will leave the meeting. Thank you, doctor.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.